Elderly folks like you, belonging to a different class, shouldn't attend the housewarming party. Henrietta, our daughter-in-law, declared loudly with a condescending look. Her audacity left us astounded and speechless. I had tolerated Henrietta's remarks for Warren's sake, but her disrespectful attitude finally pushed me over the edge. My husband, Reagan, shared my sentiment. We exchanged glances, nodded in agreement, and confronted Henrietta. "Understood," she said, smiling smugly before returning to Warren. "I am Bridget, 73 years old, and Warren is our son with Reagan." Warren had always been reserved but came into his own in college. After graduating high school, he found a job and eventually brought home a quiet woman he was seriously dating. Despite her nervous demeanor, her sincerity in wanting to marry Warren won us over, and we happily consented to their marriage. 3 years into their marriage, during Christmas, Warren and his wife were coming home for the first time. I was excited, having let them spend their first Christmas alone. Henrietta, initially shy, gradually relaxed and seemed to get along with Reagan. As darkness fell, I prepared dinner, and Henrietta offered to help in the kitchen. As we stood there, an unfamiliar voice disrupted the moment. "It's cold. This house is too cold," said Henrietta, her voice unexpectedly low and harsh. I turned to her in disbelief as she rubbed her hands together, wearing a discontented expression I had never seen before. Her eyes met mine, filled with undisguised displeasure. "I hate old houses like this. I really didn't want to come," she continued, her tone unhappy. Stunned and speechless at her sudden change, I struggled to comprehend her words. Just moments ago, we had been chatting cheerfully, and now she was venting her bad mood without restraint. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she sneered, her tone sharp. "It was all just an act to get married, you know. Now that we're married, I'm tired of it. Anyway, hurry up and get ready. I'm hungry." Henrietta, seemingly annoyed by my stunned silence, gestured dismissively towards the stove. I hurried to obey, shaken more deeply than I realized. I began bustling around, preparing for the visit. Henrietta, however, did nothing but dictate, not lifting a finger to help. She complained incessantly, criticizing my methods while making no effort herself. As preparations neared completion and only serving remained, Henrietta suddenly sprang into action. She charmed Reagan and Warren, blushing at their praise. It was then that I finally understood Henrietta's true nature. 10 years later, Warren and his wife were returning for a visit. Henrietta had revealed her true colors many times in my presence, always maintaining a different demeanor around Reagan and Warren. Despite my suspicions, I had remained silent, hoping it was all a misunderstanding. Yet each visit only confirmed my doubts. Upon hearing they were coming back, I felt a pang of dismay. I planned to avoid being alone with Henrietta as much as possible. When the doorbell rang, I sighed and opened the door to find Warren standing alone. Surprised by Henrietta's absence, I instinctively looked around for her. Warren, noticing my reaction, spoke with a hint of apology. "Sorry, Mom. Henrietta had some urgent work and will join us later," he explained. "It's okay to go ahead with the grave visit without her." Realizing Henrietta wouldn't be joining us until her work was finished, I felt a wave of relief. The thought of not having to witness Henrietta's behavior, even for a short while, lifted my spirits. I welcomed Warren into the house, and Reagan, noticing Henrietta's absence, asked about her. As I prepared tea, I found myself sighing deeply without realizing it. We decided to relax for the day and postpone the visit to the grave until the next day. When Warren informed Henrietta, she responded saying she couldn't finish her work in time but asked him to apologize on her behalf. Reagan brushed it off as unavoidable, but I couldn't shake the feeling that Henrietta simply didn't want to attend the grave visit. I didn't voice my thoughts and reassured everyone not to worry about it. The rest of the day passed uneventfully. The following day, after visiting the grave and returning home to relax, Henrietta called to say she had finished her work and would be coming over that evening. The timing of her call immediately after the grave visit struck Reagan and Warren as odd, and it heightened my suspicion. That evening, just as we were about to have dinner, Henrietta arrived looking slightly sweaty and out of breath, as if she had rushed. I couldn't help but frown involuntarily, but Reagan and Warren were delighted to see her, so it kept quiet. Henrietta, free from work, was asked to shower first while dinner was being prepared. She agreed somewhat apologetically. At dinner time, when she saw the sandwiches on the tray, she muttered unhappily, "Sandwiches. That's it. After a hot day at the grave, I'm tired of eating this." She continued to express her dissatisfaction, saying, "I managed to avoid going to someone else's grave in this heat, and all I get is a simple meal like this." As Henrietta tied up her hair and walked towards the living room, I felt anger rise within me, but I couldn't find the words to confront her. In the living room, she instantly started chatting happily with Reagan, leaving me silently frustrated. Another 10 years passed, and Warren decided to move from his apartment to a house. After discussing it with Henrietta, they decided to pay as much of the down payment themselves but asked us for a little help with the shortfall. Of course, we couldn't refuse Warren's requests, so we agreed and transferred the needed amount promptly. Soon after, Warren informed us that their new house was built, and they planned a housewarming party with both families. I hadn't seen Henrietta's parents since the wedding, so I was eager to meet them again despite everything that had transpired. When Warren invited me to attend their housewarming party next month, I readily agreed, much to his delight. He promptly shared the news with Henrietta, whom I presumed was on the other end of the phone. A few days later, Henrietta unexpectedly visited alone. I was surprised by her unannounced appearance and opened the door without realizing who it was. "Who is it?" I asked, looking up to see Henrietta with an unhappy expression. Taken aback, I hesitated before inviting her in. She quickly checked for keys at the entrance and pushed past me arrogantly, heading straight into the living room. She must have noticed that Reagan's keys were not there, indicating he was out for his daily walk and wouldn't be back for a while. Feeling somewhat trapped, I followed her into the living room. Henrietta stood there, waiting for me without sitting down. Before I could even close the door, she glared at me and spoke sharply. "Bridget, about the housewarming party. It's a nuisance, so could you please not come?" she demanded abruptly. "What are you suddenly talking about?" I responded, taken aback by Reagan's absence. Henrietta, crossing her arms, began speaking in a high-handed manner. "You're planning to talk to my parents about me, aren't you?" she accused, glaring at me with evident disgust. It was clear she didn't want her parents to know about her behavior. She must have deliberately chosen a time when Warren was at work and she had a day off, knowing Reagan's routine of taking walks. Henrietta was indeed cunning. "I had no such intention, but now that you mention it, it might not be a bad idea," I replied calmly. Henrietta frowned in annoyance. "It's no joke. I married Warren because he's good-looking and earns decently. I don't want to deal with annoying relatives," she explained bluntly, revealing her true reasons for marrying Warren. Her expression froze when she saw my astonished face. As I pondered Henrietta's strange behavior, the living room door opened behind me. I turned around to see Reagan, looking surprised as he observed Henrietta. Realizing her conversation with me had been overheard, Henrietta clicked her tongue but decided to brazen it out. "Anyway, elderly folks like you, being of a different class, shouldn't come to the housewarming party," she declared with audacity that left us astounded and at a loss for words. I had finally reached my limit with Henrietta, who dared to say such things even in Warren's absence. I had kept silent for Warren's sake until now, but I could no longer overlook her behavior. My husband Reagan seemed to share my sentiment. We exchanged glances, nodded in agreement, and calmly told Henrietta that we understood. Satisfied, she smiled and went back to Warren. Left behind, we felt suddenly weary and sat down on the sofa. On the day of the housewarming party, we decided not to go to Warren and his wife's home. We hadn't told Warren anything about the incident with Henrietta. Naturally, he must have expected us to arrive. Sipping coffee with Reagan at a cafe, I pondered this situation. Suddenly, Reagan's phone rang. He got up, answered the call, and stepped out of the cafe. I quickly paid the bill and followed him to the car. Reagan switched his phone to speaker mode so I could hear Warren's voice too. "Dad, something strange is happening. All my relatives have suddenly made other plans and you and Mom haven't arrived yet. Even Henrietta's relatives are canceling one after another. What's going on?" Feeling guilty about Warren's anxious tone but deciding to play dumb, we exchanged glances. "Who knows what Henrietta's saying?" Reagan asked casually, his acting so natural that it surprised me. Noticing my reaction, Reagan winked and gestured to keep it a secret. Suppressing a laugh, I covered my mouth. Henrietta seems confused too. "Oh, another call's coming in. I'll call back later. Be safe coming over," I said, trying to sound casual. Warren still seemed to expect our visit, which made me feel guilty, but I convinced myself it was necessary to make a point to Henrietta. Then my phone rang. It was a relative who was supposed to attend today's party. Feeling apologetic but engaged in conversation, I chatted for a while. Meanwhile, Regan's phone rang again. This time it was Warren. Regan switched to speaker mode and answered. Dad, I just spoke to Henrietta's mom. What's going on? If you can still come, please do right away. Warren's voice sounded strained, almost on the verge of tears, which tightened my chest. Regan glanced at me with concern. After a nod from me, he reassured Warren. We understand. We'll be right there. Calm down, Regan replied soothingly. Warren sounded relieved and hung up. We were at a cafe near Warren's new home, so we drove there immediately. Upon arriving and ringing the doorbell, Warren rushed out to greet us. Behind him, Henrietta stood glaring at us with furious eyes. Once inside, Warren ushered us to the living room where we settled on the sofa. Eagerly, Warren began to ask, I didn't expect you to arrive so soon. Where were you? What's going on? All our relatives are angry, Henrietta's relatives are apologizing, and I have no idea what's happening. Calm down, Warren. First of all, congratulations on your new home. I began, trying to soothe him. I'll explain everything. Turning to Henrietta, who sat silently, I continued, You know why we're the only ones here, don't you? What do you mean? Henrietta feigned ignorance, prompting a slight sigh from me before I continued. It seems you didn't want us here, but given the current situation, your worries are over, I explained calmly. What does that mean? Warren sounded confused, his brow furrowing. I smiled slightly and continued. Both your relatives and ours know everything now. Unfortunately, your plans have failed. You've already been reprimanded by your relatives, haven't you? A low growl unmistakably from Henrietta interrupted. Regan and I were astonished to hear her reaction for the first time, but I ignored it, maintaining eye contact with Henrietta. Now that your true nature is exposed, why don't you just accept it? I asked. I didn't invite you. Henrietta's voice was quieter now, making Warren lean in closer to hear her repeat herself. Suddenly, Henrietta raised her head, stood up, and began to yell. I didn't invite you. I told you not to come. Why did you come anyway? And spreading lies among the relatives, framing me, is that fun for you? Taken aback by her intensity, Warren recoiled. I sighed as Henrietta continued to insist she was the victim. Mobile phones are so handy, aren't they, Henrietta? I nodded at Regan, who took out his phone, operated it, and then looked at Warren. I just wanted to marry Warren because he's good-looking and earns decently. I don't want to deal with troublesome relatives. Anyway, elderly folks like you, being of a different class, shouldn't come to the housewarming party. Henrietta's words from that day played from Regan's mobile phone. Henrietta turned pale and glanced at Warren. After hearing the playback, Warren slowly turned to Henrietta, his mouth agape. Henrietta tried to deny it, but what excuse could she give after that recording? The weather turned bad, so I cut my walk short and came back only to hear this incredible conversation. I couldn't help but record it, Regan explained regretfully. Warren looked at me for confirmation, and I nodded firmly. I couldn't believe it at first either, Warren, but the truth is there in the recording. Henrietta's true feelings and her last words were said despite my presence. It's hard to escape now, Regan said, fixing his gaze on Henrietta. Could anyone stay calm knowing she had been deceiving everyone since her dating days with Warren, let alone after their marriage? Regan continued. Seeing his stern look, Henrietta dropped her shoulders and ceased her struggle. This seemed like affirmation to Warren, who abruptly stood up and left the house. It happened so suddenly that we couldn't stop him. Although Regan hurried after him, Warren soon returned. Apparently, Warren had driven off somewhere, leaving his mobile phone behind, making it impossible for us to call him. Henrietta was left behind, surrounded by us, trembling and pale, huddled up helplessly. Eventually, Warren returned, holding something in his hand, which he slammed in front of Henrietta. Send the divorce papers and leave, he said quietly. Henrietta looked up at Warren, her mouth agape, but Warren repeated himself. He took a pen from the holder on the table and began to fill in his part. After finishing, Warren forced the pen into Henrietta's hand and tapped on the divorce papers. Come on, sign and leave, he said forcefully. Overwhelmed, Henrietta, though frightened, filled in her part. She looked at Warren when finished. She looked at Warren when finished, but he avoided eye contact, checking for any missing details. Finding no errors, Warren forcefully made Henrietta stand up and dragged her to the front door. He pushed her outside, ignoring her attempts to cling to him and throwing her bag outside. It's late, so I'll submit this tomorrow. Don't ever come back to this property, Warren said, slamming the door shut and locking it. Henrietta's pleading voice could be heard from outside, but Warren ignored it and turned to apologize to us. "I'm sorry for the trouble. I had no idea she was like that." We could say nothing to his deep apology, just embracing him. Before long, Henrietta's voice faded away. We decided to stay at Warren's new home that night. The next morning, Warren submitted the divorce papers first thing, and his divorce from Henrietta was finalized. Concerned about his heartache, we chose to stay another night. That evening, with a somewhat calmer Warren, we discussed everything that had happened. As we recounted the past events, Warren listened with clenched fists. Regan, who was also unaware of these details, placed his hand on my shoulder as I spoke. Then, we revealed the truth about the current situation after Henrietta had left, telling us not to come. I learned that Regan had spontaneously recorded the conversation. Together, we decided to inform Henrietta's parents. When we called and explained the situation, Henrietta's parents initially were in disbelief but changed their attitude and kept apologizing after hearing the recorded audio. Angry about their daughter's misdeeds, they intended to inform the relatives who had planned to attend the housewarming party not to go. After hanging up, we discussed and decided to do the same with our relatives. They too were furious and said they wouldn't attend. That is how the current situation unfolded. Hearing all this, Warren's shoulders drooped again, worried but unable to do anything. We decided to spend another night. The next day, Warren came into the living room looking relieved and shared what happened the previous night. He had apparently contacted his former in-laws. Henrietta was now at her parents' home, being disowned and facing eviction. They also planned to bring alimony, which would be imposed on Henrietta as her debt. While Warren felt this was not enough, he seemed more settled than expected. After returning home, we immediately started packing up our old house. Now dated, it was set to be handed over as the house was being remodeled for us to live in together. Since Warren was at work during the day, the renovations were scheduled to take place then. Though costly to modify a newly built home with some financial gain from the recent events and our help, the decision was made. While waiting for the house's remodeling, we were happily clearing out our old home. "Surely Mom and Dad would prefer to live with me rather than you, Emma," my pregnant sister-in-law Karen declared, affectionately cradling her belly. "After all, you can even give them grandkids. Since we're moving here, it's only fair that you and your husband find a new place." I responded with a simple, "Okay," although Karen seemed quite content with my quick acquiescence. Deep down, I felt a sense of relief at the prospect of finally breaking free from our strained relationship. My name is Emma, and I've been married to Scott. Together, we've been grappling with the challenges of infertility. Having spent years working as a child care worker, my love for children ran deep within me. So when I discovered that conceiving was proving difficult after marrying Scott, it shook me to my core. I even confided in Scott, expressing my fear that he might regret marrying me, considering our struggle. With his gentle demeanor, Scott reassured me, saying, "I didn't marry you for children. I married you because I love you. Whatever challenges we face, we'll face them together." His words resonated with me, and we embarked on the journey of fertility treatments hand in hand. Reflecting on it now, I realize how fortunate I am to have such an exceptional husband by my side. Initially, I attempted to juggle fertility treatments with my job, but the demands of shift work made it increasingly challenging. As the treatments progressed, my emotions became more fragile, often leading to tears at the sight of children, a stark reminder of my own uncertain path to motherhood. Recognizing the strain it placed on both myself and my colleagues, and recalling Scott's suggestion that I could explore being a stay-at-home wife, I made the difficult decision to resign from my job. Now, amidst fertility treatments, I embraced the role of a full-time homemaker. Karen, Scott's younger sister, who was expecting her 5th child, learned of our struggles. Despite the sensitivity of my situation, Karen would visit with her 4 children in tow, oblivious to the emotional toll it sometimes took on me. With a casual tone, she'd remark, "Emma, you're at home now, aren't you? Why not lend me a hand with the kids? You used to work in childcare, didn't you? Take care of them for me, will you?" And with that, she'd leave her children in my care to indulge in her beauty treatments and manicures. Whenever I mentioned that it wasn't appropriate for me to babysit, Karen would dismissively retort, "In a society where people aren't having enough children, isn't someone like me, who's raising kids, more admirable? You who can't even have children should just do as I say." It was frustrating to care for someone else's children without compensation, even if she was my sister-in-law. Despite her abrasive demeanor, I couldn't ignore the longing in her children's eyes for their mother's presence. Each time they asked when she returned, it tugged at my heartstrings. I wondered the same thing myself. Naturally, I shared my concerns with Scott, including how Karen was leaving her children with me while she indulged in her beauty treatments. Scott, seething with anger, confronted Karen over the phone, only to be met with dismissiveness. Emma should be thrilled to be around kids since she can't have any of her own, Karen retorted. After all, she used to work with children, so what's the big deal? Scott, undeterred, approached Karen's husband Rob, hoping for some understanding. However, Rob echoed Karen's sentiments, insisting that our assistance was necessary. Our kids seem to enjoy Emma's company, and it's a big help to us, Rob stated. Once Emma gets pregnant, we won't impose on her anymore. But until then, we'd appreciate her support. Karen is exhausted from caring for the children, and as a homemaker, Emma should be able to pitch in. Scott had assured me that if Karen ever showed up uninvited, I had full authority to send her packing. However, her 4 children had a habit of darting straight to the back room without so much as a hello the moment they entered our home. Karen, in her usual fashion, would simply declare, "Well then, you're in charge today," before hastily departing, leaving her kids behind before I could voice any objections. One day, Karen broke her usual routine by unexpectedly stepping inside our house. Typically, she dropped off her children and swiftly left, so I was taken aback when she inquired, "When are you moving to the new house? Have you picked out any designs or anything?" Scott and I were in the process of constructing a new duplex to reside with his parents. With the house nearing completion, we were preparing for the imminent move. Despite being aware of my struggles with infertility, my in-laws had never uttered a single disparaging remark. My mother-in-law, in particular, had been a source of immense support, once reassuring me, "There are countless happy families out there without children." It was a sentiment that had been a lifeline for me. Now, as my in-laws grew older and began to experience various ailments, we realized the importance of living together before they required full-time care. Hence, Scott made the decision to build the duplex. It was a rare occasion when Karen showed genuine interest in the duplex, so I eagerly shared the anticipated images and blueprints with her. Though Karen seldom visited her parents' house, the prospect of the home they would soon occupy seemed to capture her attention. She probed about the number of rooms and the amount of sunlight the house received, to which I assured her there were no concerns. When queried about our moving date, Karen simply responded with a curt, "I see," before abruptly departing, leaving her children behind. A sense of unease lingered within me, but at the time, I brushed it off. Eventually, the decision was made for us to move into the 2-family home. Shortly thereafter, my in-laws settled in, and our life together with Scott's parents commenced seamlessly. Living under one roof proved to be harmonious, and we felt truly fortunate to have such kind-hearted in-laws. Then, unexpectedly, Karen made an unannounced visit one day, accompanied by her 4 children. Without so much as a glance at her kids, she turned to me and uttered, "Hey Emma, we need to talk." As my in-laws, who hadn't seen their grandchildren in quite some time, were being overwhelmed with attention, I found myself abruptly escorted out to the hallway. Amidst my concerns about whether my in-laws, who had been lamenting their recent back problems, could manage the energetic kids, Karen dropped a bombshell. "Hey, why would you and Scott vacate this house?" I was caught off guard by her unexpected words, but Karen forged ahead, seemingly unconcerned with my reaction. "Undoubtedly, Mom and Dad would prefer to reside with me rather than with you, incapable of granting them grandchildren. After all, I'm their true daughter, bound by blood," Karen declared haughtily, her hand caressing her burgeoning belly. It was evident that Karen's scheme involved moving in with my in-laws and relying on them for childcare. "See how thrilled Mom and Dad are to dote on their grandchildren," Karen remarked, gesturing towards my struggling in-laws who were attempting to manage their lively brood of grandkids. Despite my futile attempts to reason with Karen, her determination remained unyielding. Each passing moment only fueled my simmering resentment towards her for ridiculing my infertility and imposing her children on my compassionate in-laws. After much contemplation, a solution dawned on me, and with a resigned nod, I uttered, "Fine, we'll find another place." Karen eagerly set the timeline for our departure and their subsequent occupancy, leaving her children behind once more. Yet amidst the chaos, I found a sense of relief, viewing this as an opportunity to sever ties with Karen. As time elapsed, the day arrived for Karen's family to move into the duplex that Scott had painstakingly built. Wondering if the transition had been smooth, my phone suddenly rang. It was Karen. As I picked up the phone, Karen's voice pierced through with an edge of fury. "What on earth is going on? Why hasn't your stuff been cleared out yet? There's no space for our belongings. And where are Mom and Dad supposed to go?" Scott, his parents, and I had vacated the two-family residence, but some furniture remained behind. Karen's agitation was palpable, prompting my reply. "The decision was sudden, so we've only partially moved out for now. Your parents are staying with us." Unbelievable. Karen's retort came swift and sharp. "I find it outrageous that you and your husband have taken it upon yourselves to move into the house Scott built without consulting us. It's equally outrageous to offload the kids onto us and gallivant around town, despite our repeated warnings about the challenges of caring for them. That's beside the point for now. Can I just dispose of any remaining furniture that I don't care for?" Karen inquired impatiently. "If you're truly intending to move in, feel free to do so. But are you absolutely certain about this?" I questioned, a hint of skepticism lacing my words. "What do you mean?" Karen snapped irritably. It was then that I dropped the bombshell. "Can you and your husband manage the mortgage for that house? It's a substantial investment, given it's a two-family home." By that juncture, I had already spun a web of lies. Even my apparent agreement to their moving in was fabricated. There was no way I could entertain Karen's notion of seizing control over the duplex that my husband Scott had painstakingly constructed. It's only natural that the furniture remains, considering Scott, his parents, and I are currently enjoying a vacation at Yellowstone National Park. In reality, the house had been entirely paid for with the combined savings of Scott, myself, and his parents. There was no mortgage to speak of, but the fabrication served its purpose in rattling Karen. Scott and his parents were in on the plan. When Karen demanded to speak with Scott, he adopted a mischievous grin and echoed my deception, claiming there was still a mortgage. Upon hearing this over the phone, Karen reportedly broke down in tears, unable to fathom the financial strain. She ultimately chose to retreat to her previous residence with her husband, Rob, and their children, after Scott assured her she could still withdraw and that we were also returning home. Upon our return home, narrowly averting Karen's attempted takeover, she wasted no time in launching into a tirade. "You never disclosed there was still a mortgage. Why keep us in the dark?" Karen's voice reverberated with anger as she directed her accusations at us. With a nonchalant shrug, I retorted, "Because you never inquired," causing Karen's face to flush an even deeper shade of red. The children were thrilled at the thought of this becoming our home. "You've shattered their dreams as well. Maybe your inability to conceive is punishment for your negligence. You owe it to them to properly care for the kids. Even if it's just playing with them, it's better than doing nothing." Karen's words stung with venom. Listening to Karen's venomous tirade, my typically reserved mother-in-law rose from her seat and delivered a resounding slap across Karen's cheek. Taken aback by my typically serene mother-in-law's unexpected outburst, she turned her attention to Karen with a cutting edge in her tone. "You can't even handle the simple task of playing with the kids? Were you planning to move into this duplex just to unload your childcare responsibilities onto us? I was willing to lend a hand if you were struggling to raise your children alone, but who would want to assist a daughter who shirks her parenting duties and acts entitled? Leave this house immediately and never return." A note of desperation crept into Karen's voice as she protested. "Aren't you on my side, Mom? I'm your real daughter, aren't I?" In response to Karen's tearful plea, my usually reserved father-in-law found his tone heavy with disappointment. "It's precisely because you're a real daughter that your behavior is so disgraceful. I feel remorseful for raising such a self-centered daughter. Scott has informed me of your cruel remarks towards Emma regarding her struggles with infertility. That's an unforgivable act." Karen's glare intensified towards me, but I couldn't help but feel a twinge of pity for her, knowing she would be facing her struggles alone from now on. With a solemn expression, I opened the front door for her. "As both your mother and father have stated, it's time for you to leave. I won't be assisting with childcare any longer, so please take responsibility for your own." "You're all heartless monsters," Karen lashed out before departing the house in tears. From that moment on, she never crossed the threshold of our home again. When Karen arrived at our house, Scott was away at work. Later, he received a call from her. but her words were barely intelligible through her uncontrollable sobs. It became apparent that her family was facing dire financial troubles. Karen had been indulging in beauty treatments and manicures, while Rod had been squandering money on lottery tickets. With their savings dwindling, Karen saw moving into the duplex Scott had built as a solution to avoid paying rent and utilities. When she turned to Scott, who earned significantly more than the average income, for financial assistance, he couldn't overlook her past mockery of my infertility. Scott advised Karen to cut back on beauty treatments and lottery tickets as a solution, but she tearfully refused. He couldn't bring himself to financially assist such an arrogant individual, even if she was his blood relative. As their financial situation worsened, Rob had to resort to taking a second job to cover their expenses after exhausting their funds on lottery tickets. Similarly, Karen had to forgo her regular beauty treatments due to a lack of funds. Once polished and composed, Karen was now almost unrecognizable after months of financial strain. It was only when Scott pointed her out that I realized it was indeed Karen. Yet, despite Karen's challenges, her children remained vibrant and content in her care, which was a relief. And then, a miraculous twist occurred. I discovered that I was pregnant with twins. However, even amidst the joyous news, tears welled in my eyes when the doctor confirmed it. Scott, by my side, also shed tears of happiness as we shared in the overwhelming emotion. My in-laws were equally ecstatic, finally seeing the realization of our long-held dream for a child. Though I hadn't voiced it to Scott, I couldn't help but wonder if the release from the stress caused by Karen had played a part in my pregnancy. Reflecting on the unwavering support of Scott and my in-laws, who chose to stand by me rather than Karen, fills me with immense gratitude. It's because of their unwavering support that I've been blessed with two precious lives. Now, all I can do is hope fervently that the babies growing within me will be born healthy. Melissa felt really sad after her grandma passed away. She missed her a lot. Her grandma used to say that everything would be okay and that she believed in Melissa. Those were some of the last things her grandma said before she died. Melissa and her grandma lived together since Melissa was born. She never knew her parents and didn't want to make her grandma sad by asking about them. Melissa thought maybe her parents left her because they had other things to do. Lots of people visited Melissa's grandma. Some were nice and some were not. Melissa would stay in her room when they came over because she didn't want to bother them. She knew her grandma was helping them with things. As Melissa got older, she started to understand more about the world. She realized it was different from what she thought before. Melissa thought her grandma knew a lot of things that others didn't, and as she grew up, she started to understand those things too. Sometimes it made her cry because it was scary. One day, Melissa was crying in her room again. Her grandma heard her and came in quietly to see if she was okay. Melissa said she was fine, so her grandma came in and asked what was wrong. Melissa told her grandma that she was scared. Her grandma gave her a hug and asked why she was scared. Melissa told her grandma everything. Her grandma hugged her tightly and said she was worried this might happen, that Melissa would inherit her gift. After her grandma passed away, Melissa didn't know what to do. She was only 15 and worried she would have to go to an orphanage and then to a foster home. Melissa didn't want that, so she decided to run away and hide somewhere far away. She didn't know why she made that decision, but she hoped it would work out somehow. Mr. Wesley Harris kissed his daughter on the forehead and promised to come home earlier. Chelsea sighed and told her dad it was okay for him to be at work a lot. She reassured him that she would be fine. Wesley suggested having a movie night to cheer her up. Chelsea agreed with her dad, saying she'd be okay and wanted to talk to him about something. "What is it, sweetheart?" Mr. Harris asked. Chelsea asked if they could try to find someone. "Are you sure, honey?" her father asked, concerned. Chelsea didn't want a caregiver who only did medical stuff and treated her like a kid. She wanted someone she could talk to. She didn't like the nurses from agencies because they felt fake and cold, like robots following rules. She wanted someone real. Wesley kissed his daughter again and promised to find a solution. As he went to work, he couldn't shake off how strange life had become. Just 5 years ago, he had a happy family, but now his wife had died in a car crash, and his daughter was seriously ill and bedridden. Despite spending a lot on her medicine, Chelsea's health was deteriorating, and the doctors weren't hopeful. At first, Chelsea's illness wasn't so scary. She got treatment and seemed like any other kid, but things took a turn for the worse. Chelsea started losing weight fast and became very weak. It had been a year, and she could barely leave her bed. Lately, she'd been in more pain, and it broke Wesley's heart to see her suffer. Despite doctors' prescriptions, the painkillers didn't seem to help much, and Chelsea was becoming resistant to stronger ones. When Wesley arrived at work, his driver asked if he could leave early because his wife was being discharged from the hospital. "Congratulations. Of course, go ahead. Let me know if you need anything," Wesley said. The driver thanked him and asked if he could take a day off tomorrow. "Sure, take it. By the way, is it a boy or a girl?" "It's a girl. We named her Melissa." Wesley smiled and complimented the name Melissa. He wished his driver congratulations again and headed to his office. Despite the bustling activity around him, life seemed dull and dreary at home. While others celebrated weddings and births, his family silently waited for what would come next. The hardest part for Wesley was staying strong and not crumbling under the weight of it all. He tried his best to support Chelsea and smiled as much as he could. Chelsea was smart and mature, handling her condition remarkably well, but it pained Wesley to see her confined to her bed, knowing there was little hope for improvement. His secretary interrupted his thoughts, asking him to sign some papers. "Andy, I need your help. I'm looking for someone to spend time with my daughter, not from an agency, someone real." "That's tricky. Maybe someone her age or someone in need of a place to stay," Andy suggested. "Yeah, we could try that. Okay, give me the papers," Wesley said, ready to explore this idea. Wesley finished his work early to keep his promise to Chelsea. He decided to stop by a convenience store to buy her some sweets, even though the housekeeper and doctor said she shouldn't have sugar. Wesley knew a chocolate bar would make her happy, even if it wasn't the healthiest choice. As he left the store, he noticed a girl standing outside who seemed troubled. Despite not looking homeless, Wesley felt she needed help. He approached her and asked if she needed assistance. The girl was initially scared but then smiled and asked for some spare change. She explained she was out of money and hungry. Wesley spotted a nearby restaurant and offered to buy her some food. "Thank you so much, sir. This is really embarrassing," the girl said. "No need to feel embarrassed. Let's get you something to eat," Wesley replied kindly. As they walked to the restaurant, Wesley couldn't help but think about the girl's age. She seemed to be about 15 or 16, just like his daughter Chelsea. But there was something in her eyes that made her seem older. The girl ate eagerly, and watching her made Wesley hungry too. Suddenly, he had an idea. "I'm sorry, I never asked your name," Wesley said. "I'm Melissa," the girl replied. "Melissa, where are your parents? Do you live with them?" Melissa paused. "I don't really know them. I used to live with my grandma in a trailer park, but she passed away 7 months ago, so I moved to the city." "Do you have somewhere to stay?" Wesley asked. Melissa shrugged. "I was staying with my grandma's friend for a while, helping out around the house, but then her kids took her to another city." "So, you're saying you have nowhere to go?" Wesley asked. Melissa nodded. "I guess not. Would you like to come live with us? I have a daughter," Wesley offered. "Is she sick?" "How do you know?" Melissa asked, surprised. Melissa noticed Wesley's confusion and explained how she figured out he had a daughter who was sick. "You're pretty sharp. How old are you?" Wesley asked. "I'll be 16 soon," Melissa replied. "Do you have any identification with you?" Wesley inquired. "It's at the mall nearby. A nice janitor lets me keep my stuff there. Sometimes I help him clean and he lets me stay," Melissa explained. Wesley considered the situation. He liked Melissa. "So, what do you think? Want to come live with us? We have a nurse and a housekeeper. My daughter just needs someone to talk to," Wesley offered. "I understand. Yeah, I can do that," Melissa agreed. "You barely know me, yet you agreed to come with me," Wesley remarked. "Don't worry. I trust you," Melissa replied. "How much do you think I should pay you?" Wesley asked. "You don't have to pay me anything," Melissa said, kindly declining. Wesley thought Melissa was very innocent and genuine. They were in a car, driving past the bright lights of the city, and Melissa was gazing out the window. Wesley saw this as an opportunity to discuss his daughter. "So, Melissa, let me tell you about Chelsea." "You don't really have to. If she wants to, she'll share her story with me when she's ready," Melissa replied. Wesley agreed with a nod. He was still perplexed and curious about where Melissa had actually come from. When they got to his house, Wesley first showed Melissa her bedroom. She really liked it. "It's beautiful. I've never had a bed like that." Make yourself at home. You can unpack while I step out for a bit, Wesley said. Melissa was thrilled with her own bedroom. She meticulously unpacked her belongings and arranged her clothes tightly in the closet. After finishing, Melissa silently left her room and walked into the hallway where Wesley was walking towards her. He stopped and said that it was time for her to meet Chelsea. Chelsea was sitting in her bed, looking out the window. "Hey, honey." Chelsea slowly turned around and smiled. "Hey, Dad." "Melissa, this is my daughter, Chelsea, and Chelsea, this is Melissa." Wesley introduced them. "Nice to meet you, Melissa," Chelsea said, looking at Melissa with great interest. "She is a really nice young lady. I'm sure you will get along well and make really good friends," Wesley added. "All right, you two go ahead and get to know each other. I'll go change," Wesley said. Melissa slowly walked over to Chelsea's bed and looked at her without saying anything. "Hi," she said. "Hi," Chelsea replied. Chelsea could feel that Melissa was looking deep into her soul. She had a weird feeling. Chelsea was a bit frightened and looked at Melissa, but then Melissa smiled. "Don't be scared. Everything's gonna be all right," Melissa said. Gradually, the awkward tension between them subsided and they started talking. By the time Wesley came back, Chelsea was laughing. As he walked in and saw them, he froze. He hadn't seen her beaming and heard this laughter for the last couple of years. Melissa was telling her how her grandma would have herbal teas every time to make her memory better. She kept losing her shiny things and thought that she was forgetting them somewhere, and it turned out that a magpie was flying in and stealing them. "Are you guys having fun?" Chelsea turned to her dad and said, "We are." With that, Wesley said that dinner would be ready in an hour. He was expecting a refusal from his daughter as usual. This time, Chelsea said, "Dad, do you think we can move my bed to the kitchen? I want to eat there." Wesley was shocked. "Of course, honey. Let me get the chair instead." They had purchased a special chair for her a long time ago, but Chelsea never used it. She had totally been against it. Wesley instructed the housekeeper to prepare a table for 3 people, which surprised her. However, when she noticed Chelsea chatting animatedly with another girl, she quickly got to work. Chelsea couldn't eat a lot, but she had a hearty appetite. It was peculiar and uncommon. It was the first time she ate well. For a brief moment, Wesley began to question what the doctors had told him, but he realized that doctors from 3 different countries can be wrong at the same time. Before going to bed, Melissa noticed that Chelsea was curled up in pain. "Melissa, can you call the housekeeper? I need a shot," Chelsea said. But Melissa walked up to Chelsea and put her palm on top of her head. After a minute, Chelsea began to feel that the pain was subsiding. She had never felt anything like that before. She wanted to ask how Melissa was doing that, but she couldn't. Her eyes were drooping, and she felt like she was falling asleep. Melissa stood up to shut the door and saw the housekeeper hurrying to give Chelsea a shot. "Excuse me, ma'am. She's better. She fell asleep." "What do you mean she's sleeping? What about the—" The housekeeper appeared inside and saw Chelsea was indeed asleep. "That's impossible." 2 weeks passed, and Chelsea had changed a lot. Wesley was astonished. He saw how Melissa was leading her by the hand carefully. For the first time in the last few years, Chelsea got out into the yard. Wesley couldn't believe what he was seeing, but he was still wary that it could be something temporary. "Mr. Harris, where did you find this girl?" the housekeeper asked. "You won't believe it, but I met her on the street outside a store." "Is everything okay?" "Yeah, everything's fine. I mean, I don't know how to say this, but she's a bit strange. She knows everything. The other day she predicted that it was going to rain in 10 minutes. She told me that my son's sore throat needs to be treated with some kind of herb. I mean, look how much Chelsea has changed. Are you telling me she's some kind of clairvoyant or something? I don't know. I don't really believe those things, but I just don't understand how." Wesley smiled, but he agreed with the housekeeper. Melissa had a piercing gaze. In the morning, Wesley was getting ready for work. Melissa walked out to him from her room. "Mr. Harris, do you have to go to work today?" "Yes. Is everything okay? Can you stay home today, please?" "Why, Melissa? What's going on?" "I have a lot of things to do at the office." Melissa kept begging him not to go anywhere and to tell his driver to stay in the city today. Wesley didn't know why he agreed to listen to her. In the end, he decided he could probably work from home today. When he turned on the TV, he saw that there was a terrible accident on the highway involving a dozen cars. It happened exactly at the exit he was supposed to take and at around the time he usually passes through that area. He immediately got a call from his driver. The driver talked for a while and thanked Mr. Harris for letting him stay in the city today. Wesley got up and headed for Melissa's room. He couldn't take it anymore. He really wanted to know who she really was. He knocked on her door, but there was no response. Then he walked towards Chelsea's room, and as he was approaching, he heard loud noises. They were arguing about something. He stood behind a slightly open door and looked through. Melissa was shouting at Chelsea. "Get up now." "I can't." "Who told you you can't?" "But I'm really sick. I can't walk." "I'm not supposed to walk." "But you're still alive. Give me your hand." Wesley froze because Chelsea put her right foot on the floor, then the left, and then she got up. She wobbled immediately, and Wesley was about to lunge, but Melissa had already had her shoulder up for her. "There you go. Good job, Chelsea," Melissa told her. "And you were telling me you were destined to be in bed." Chelsea burst out laughing.